The hallway clock clicks once, and then goes on refusing to move. Somewhere, a ventilator exhales like a sleeping animal. The night staff learn to step around what the day people never notice. A light that one Tidaya call bell that insists on being heard from an empty room the way a face looks different in 3 a.m. fluorescent. We tell ourselves it is fatigue, it is plumbing, it is nothing. Tonight, I will tell you what we really see when no one else is watching. I was the night charge nurse on a med-surg floor where the windows faced the highway. At 2 a.m., headlights skimmed the ceilings like fish under ice. We kept the lights low and the doors cracked, and the only real sound was the drip of IV pumps and the hiss of oxygen. Those were the sounds you came to trust. They told you that the machines had not betrayed you yet. That night, I did rounds with a mug of cold coffee and a list of labs due at dawn. Room 412 had been emptied at 10. The patient had gone home the day before, bed stripped, mattress glossy with disinfectant. Housekeeping had wheeled the trash out and left the door propped open to air. I walked past 412 without looking inside because there was nothing to look at. Only that clean, restless emptiness rooms have after they've been used. When I reached the end of the hall, a call light chimed, thin and pleasant, the same tune it always played. On the panel at the desk, one red square glowed. Room 412. I almost laughed. I tapped the panel to silence it, assumed a glitch, and walked back anyway because the body still listens when a bell rings in the night. Room 412 was vacant. Bed made, no monitor, no patient. The nurse station panel chimed again, and I heard, very faintly, the smaller noise that lives under the chime, the pressure of a thumb on a plastic button. I stood in the doorway and told myself what I would write. Malfunction, maintenance request, please evaluate. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and the ghost of saline. I held the cool remote in my hand, tested it, and watched the panel flash as if the room had a voice. I hung the remote on the rail and stepped back into the hall. The light chimed again. Another nurse, Maria, raised an eyebrow. She had been at this longer than me. She told me the truth with a shrug. Sometimes the panels do that. Sometimes the rooms don't know they're empty. We silenced the board and went on with the work that keeps you from thinking. A Foley to replace. Vancomycin to hang. A confused man trying to climb out of bed because the walls were unfamiliar, even though they were the same as yesterday. The floor settled. An elevator coughed and descended. The chime from 412 insisted again. Every time I walked past, the remote was rotated on its hook, the way an object looks after someone has handled it without wanting to be noticed. At 312, the stairs door opened without a person behind it. The air mover down the hall kicked on and then stuttered, off, on. I tried to be a grown-up. I tried to be the professional I was when sun exists. I took a small flashlight and went into 412 to trace the line from the call button to the jack and then into the wall. I found nothing wrong. The bed was smooth. No weight had creased it. I stood very still and listened. The hospital is never quiet. There are hundreds of tiny lives happening in it, the machines making the smallest breath sounds. Under that, something new. A whispering friction, like skin on polyester. Not a mouse, not insects, not air. I did not speak. I just stood there until the sound stopped. When I turned to leave, the whiteboard near the door held handwriting that hadn't been there. It was the usual, the ritual we did for every admission. Nurse name, tech name, goal for the day. My name was written in the tidy, square print of the man we had discharged 2 days earlier. He had been meticulous about writing, asking for the marker to write his pain goals himself. The board had been wiped clean already. There was no marker now. The letters had that just written shine. I carried the board to the sink and scrubbed it with sanitizer until the words blurred into a fog. I am not superstitious. I am a tired human who still has to draw blood before 5 a.m. I scrubbed because it was something I could do, because I didn't want Maria or the new float nurse to see it and feel what I was feeling. By 4, the chime had gone quiet. I went back to the desk and filled out my maintenance note. At the bottom, on reflex, I wrote the patient's last name, so facilities would know which bed cable had worked last, the way we sometimes added details that helped no one but made the form feel complete. I realized what I'd done, curse of muscle memory, and went to correct it. The panel chimed one last time. Room 412, bright red. The intercom crackled like a breath taken too close to a microphone. A man's voice, dry and papery from oxygen months, said the same 4 words he'd said to me every night he was on my shift. He said he didn't want to bother anyone, but he had learned it was better to ask while he was still calm. He asked for a blanket. He said my name the way my father used to when I was small, careful, kind, not wanting to wake me. The intercom hummed afterward with a soft, electric regret. I went to 412. The bed was made. The blanket folded at the foot, had a corner draped out as if someone had tried to pull it up and lost the will halfway. I stood by the bed and tucked it in anyway, smoothing an absence, my palms remembering the shape of a body that was no longer there. A quilt of warm air from the vent moved over my hands and made the hairs rise. I said a thing I had never said out loud at work. I told him that he could rest. I told him that he didn't need to be so polite anymore. I told him I would keep the room warm until morning. When the sun dragged a pale stripe across the floor, day shift arrived with their coffees and their bright voices. The board was clean. The chime was silent. The maintenance ticket said no issues found. The only sign was the bedspread, which the housekeeper noticed, and scolded me over, a tiny corner untucked like a promise kept too late. I slept when I got home, but before sleep took me, the thought turned over like a coin. It wasn't the voice that undid me. It was the way he said my name, like a button pressed by a thumb that wanted not to bother anyone anymore. I have never ignored a call light since, even from an empty room. Some rooms don't know they're empty, and some names don't know they're finished being said. It was a long night, but the longest part was the silence afterward. The part where you realize a bell only rings because something, somewhere, remembers your hand. And that was the last time I ever walked past a glowing red square without answering it. I was a security officer assigned to the night rounds of the OB wing, a job everyone said would be easy. New babies put a happiness in people that diffused even under bad lighting. My rounds were routine. Check stairwells, check doors, check the alarms on the bassinets, the ones that go off if a baby is moved where it shouldn't be. At night, those alarms were the only thing I feared, not because of noise, but because of what the noise would mean. We had one renovation going on at the far end, rooms 22 through 26 paneled with plastic sheeting and signs that said dust containment. No patients there, just drywall dust and the stubborn smell of adhesive that coated your tongue. I had to walk through anyway, because rules like to be obeyed more than they like to be helpful. Just after 3, I heard a baby cry, not the scrunched, indignant bleat of a hungry newborn. This had the stutter of a cry that had been going on for a while and was past convincing anyone. I glanced at the monitor panel at the nurse's desk. No alarms, no movement indicators lit up. The monitor tech, a woman with a crossword folded into fourths, pointed at the green screen and shrugged. No one out of their bassinets, no one near a door. The cry came again, thin as thread, from down the plastic-shrouded hall. I told the tech I'd check the stairwell and walked into the renovation zone with my flashlight low to save the eyes I had left. The plastic whispered against itself as the HVAC stirred it. The cry threaded through the sheet like it had learned to move through obstacles. I reminded myself of the vent system's gift for throwing sound. The cry could be from anywhere. The sound could be a human memory dressed as a noise. Near room 24, the plastic was taped open. Inside, the room had been stripped to a glossy floor and a wall patching map. In the corner, an infant warmer stood plugged in. These things are stainless altars with little side wings for instruments. This one had been forgotten here by a careless move team or stored here with intent no one wrote down. The warmer's display was dark. A thin line of dust circled its base, unbroken. Above it, a heat lamp dome drooped like the head of a flower after rain. The cry came again, from inside the room and not inside the room. I stepped closer until the reflection of my flashlight spilled across the heater's dome. The warmer lit up on its own, or maybe my mind decided it did before it actually did. The display blinked to life with numbers zeroed to sanity. A soft chime sounded, not the alarm. The tone you hear when your finger wakes a sleeping device. The bed under the lamp was empty, mattress bare. The lamp brightened anyway, warming nothing, warming air. I thought of unplugging it. I thought of calling Biomed. I did neither. I stepped closer to read the tiny label stuck on the side. Each device has a number. This one was logged to the old NICU on the 7th floor that no longer existed, swallowed by a rebuild years ago. The label had the name of a nurse hand-scrawled beneath the barcode, the way people claim things so they don't get moved. The name began with an E and ended with an A. I recognized it, and recognition came with a taste like pennies. She had retired before I was hired, moved away, and a rumor had followed her out of the building, the kind of rumor people pretend not to like repeating. The cry had gone quiet. In its place, a new sound, light as fingernails tapping the thin plexi hood. The warmer's bed measured weight now, a digital number stepping from 0 to 1, then to 2, settling at 3 pounds even. I told myself the scale was sensitive, and I was breathing too hard. The lamp stayed on. The display set itself to a heat that would not harm skin. I kept my hands at my sides. The truth about security work at night is you are there to stand between fear and the staff who keep the real things alive. I told the air the thing we tell it when there is noise we cannot name. I said I was just here to check the door. I reached for the room's handle to mark it locked and found it cold, colder than the steel beside it. The cry returned, small now, the sound a throat makes when hunger has exhausted its argument and given way to need. I went back to the desk and asked the monitor tech if she had ever met the nurse with the E name. She had, 20 years back. She said the woman had been small and precise and had lost a child on a winter shift when both her hands were already holding someone else's life. People who train their hands that much don't sleep well after. People who keep watch long enough forget which alarms are for the living and which are for the things that want to be alive again. We both looked at the panel. Nothing showed. No movements. No cries measured by software. I went back once more, not because of duty, but because leaving a heater on in an empty room violates the same part of you that knows not to leave a candle unattended. The plastic draped the door again the way water returns to a smoothness after you pass your hand through it. Inside, the warmer was dark. Dust had crept back into its corners, honest as time. I ran my finger along the edge of the bed and felt heat in the metal that should have cooled by now. In the dust, a small arc the size of a heel. Not a print. Not proof. A mark left by pressure that had been there and then not there. The kind of thing you only see when you're looking for a reason to look away. By the end of my shift, I logged the room as secure and the device as to be relocated. The form asked for a reason. I wrote the simplest lie that is also true. I wrote environmental concern, temperature fluctuation in unoccupied area. When the day crew came in and I told them, they laughed in the way day people laugh, tipping away from you as if your words are a drink they don't want. The renovation team moved the warmer that afternoon. The label with the name went missing. At night now, when I walk that hall, I pause by the place where room 24 was and is again. The vent makes the plastic breathe. The lights buzz soft at their seams. I feel the air over my hands the way a heat lamp does when it remembers work it was built to do. The scariest thing about the cry wasn't that it was there. It was that for a few seconds, the hospital knew exactly what to do about it. We warmed the air for a weight too light to set off an alarm, and that is somehow worse. I make my rounds and check my doors. The key turns with its old mechanical certainty. Every now and then, something inside the wall taps, very gentle, as if to ask if I'm still listening. And I am. On that floor, I always am. I'm an imaging tech, mostly CT at night, which means I walk patients through the tunnel twice. First the underground corridor between buildings, then the scanner itself. People think the scanner is the hard part, because the room looks like a spaceship. It isn't. Once you've closed your eyes, you surrender to the noise and the voice that tells you when to hold your breath. The worst part is the walk. Our hospital had a connector under the surgery building, a stretch of concrete that stayed 5 degrees cooler than anywhere else. The walls carried old maps of fire routes and a corporate mural no one ever finished. The floor had a shine where gurneys shaved it and a dullness where shoes wore it down. At night, the motion sensors timed out, and you had to wave your arm to convince the lights to care again. At 1:40, I went to collect a patient from psych overflow. Transport was backed up, so I did the run myself, pushing a wheelchair for the formality of it. The patient was a man in his 30s, quiet, sober. The kind of quiet that isn't relief, but containment. He kept his eyes on the floor and answered questions with the smallest movement of his head. The nurse handed me a chart with the clipped language of protocols and a warning in a lower human voice, lately fearful of being followed. We took the elevator down. The doors opened to the corridor and its breath of old dust and bleach. I told him we had a 5-minute walk. He nodded. We started. The lights lifted awake one by one, and each time they did, they left behind a dark patch until brightness claimed it. The sound of our steps echoed back at us in the register of someone keeping the same pace, 6 paces behind. I told myself it was math and acoustics. He heard it too because he tightened his hands on the wheel arms. When we hit the bend where the mural dissolves into cinder block, a motion detector failed to notice us. The next light did not wake. The sensor above it carried a small red dot that means asleep. I raised an arm, waved it, stepped forward, then back. The light answered on its own time, flaring into honesty and then settling. During the flare, for less than a second, the corridor reflected something that did not belong to our bodies. The shadow was tall, thin, with a stoop at the shoulders, like a person who has learned to make themselves smaller in doorways. I pushed the chair again and refused to adjust my pace. The man didn't speak, but his breath developed a count you learn to recognize. The number people give themselves so they don't run. The echo of our steps acquired an extra ricochet, smaller, quicker, like a smaller set of feet adjusting to keep up. If fear is anything, it is the moment you call a thing by the simplest wrong name to make it tolerable. I told him and myself that it was the building cooling. We both knew buildings don't need to keep up with you. Halfway, there is a service door with a wired glass window that looks into an old supply alcove used now for nothing. If you stare long enough, the wire makes the glass look like it holds a film of rain. The man turned his head toward it, and then away as if he had promised himself not to do that anymore. I looked because I hadn't made any promises. The alcove held a rolling ladder, a cart, and the shape of someone standing so close to the glass that the wire grid cut their face into squares. It looked like me, because we all project ourselves into panes, and for one dry second I was fine with that lie. Then the figure lifted a hand the way you lift a hand when you want to touch a shoulder and don tea. And I understood the grid wasn't over my reflection. It was over a face that had learned to live without names. We reached the scanner. The room lights were clean, everything in their logic and hard edges. I prepped him, explained the scan, told him about the table moving, the noise it would make. He thanked me with the smallest sound. He lay down. The scanner started its soft, hungry hum. In the tech room, the monitor drew a green perimeter around his body. The vitals ticked over. The doors were closed. The camera in the tunnel feed showed the corridor empty, the way emptiness looks when a camera wants to be believed. Halfway through the scan, the intercom in the corridor clicked, the way metal throat clears. The motion sensor in the feed registered movement just at its edge, but didn't identify a shape. The light on the far end woke without anyone to deserve it. The next light stayed dark. I watched the feed, not because I expected anything, but because we watch what we fear will make us look ridiculous when we tell it later. On the audio channel, something moved like a person deciding whether to say a word. In the scanner, the man lifted his hands off the table. The machine scolded me with yellow text. I spoke calmly through the room speaker and asked him to keep his arms by his sides, to hold his breath when asked. He lowered them. The camera showed nothing and something, the way fog is mostly weather and a little bit thought. I knew then that someone else had learned the map of this corridor by heart and had chosen, at least for tonight, to use the same path we did. When the scan finished, the table whispered him out. He sat up and looked at the door to the corridor, then at me. He didn't want to go back that way. I didn't blame him. We could have taken the elevator up to the main, walked a longer path through brightness and noise. But another patient was waiting, and the night pooled where it always pools, at the level where people think nothing important happens. We went back through the connector. The lights obliged without pause. The echo kept our pace, no faster, no slower, like a person who knows that if they are patient, they will arrive at the same place as you without being seen. At the far end, we paused at the elevator. I hit the button and felt warmth under my thumb, as if someone had pressed it very recently with a hand colder than mine. The doors opened on an empty car. The air inside held that faint scent of old rain the tunnel sometimes collects, even in dry months. Up in psych overflow, the nurse took him back with a smile that was a real act of kindness. I asked her if there was another way he could be escorted to and from imaging when the order came next time. She nodded without asking why. People who work nights trade favors like charms. As I turned to go, the man looked at me with a face that had more rooms in it than any hallway. He said, in a voice that barely moved the air, that it always stands 6 paces back and never tries to pass. He said this like a fact he was ashamed to know. I took the tunnel a last time at Shift S end because leaving a fear behind you without looking at it is like leaving a switch on. The lights woke. The mural was still unfinished, a parade of shapes with no hands. I walked slower than before. In the wired glass of the service door, my reflection kept my pace, but at my shoulder the grid wavered as if the glass remembered a heat my body didn't give off. I whispered into the space the thing I say when machines stall and rooms refuse to empty. I said I was going through. I said it as if asking permission, but not really. The echo answered with the length of the corridor, no more, no less. In the end, nothing touched me. Nothing needed to. The worst horrors are courteous. They keep their distance and still make certain you know they could close it. When the elevator doors opened at last into the normal hospital air, I felt the night lift off my shoulders like a lead apron. The memory of it didn't lift. It never does. On some walks, I can still hear an extra set of steps that never overtakes me. I keep my pace. I do my job. And when a patient asks if we can take the long way, I tell them we have time. I do not look back, because that is the deal it seems to want, and some bargains you only survive by honoring. The last thing you should ever do in a hospital at 3 in the morning is turn around and count who is following you.